Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. In a significant act of support for India in its protracted military standoff with China at Doklam, Japan has said there should be no attempt to change the status quo on the ground by force. The Japanese statement comes as an endorsement of the Indian position that China has violated agreements with India and Bhutan in attempting to build a road through Doklam Plateau. Japanese Ambassador Kenji Hiramatsu's observation on Doklam comes 2 months after Indian troops stalled Chinese road construction activities and is seen as endorsing India's stance as being important for a peaceful resolution. The Japanese reaction follows 2 separate interventions by the US calling for direct dialogue between India and China to resolve the crisis while cautioning against unilateral changes on the ground. This too has been seen as supportive of India's point of view. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze if Japan's move to back India will tilt the geopolitical balance in Asia. Joining me on the program today are Lieutenant General Raj Kadyan, retired Deputy Vice Chief of Army Staff; Baldas Ghoshal, Secretary General, Society for Indian Ocean Studies; Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, former Secretary, MEA and Distinguished Fellow, ORF; and Sanjeev Srivastava, founder editor, Edit Platter. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to start with you. What do you think of this move? Because India and Japan have been coming closer and collaborating and cooperating on several issues. Now the Japanese have come and supported us as far as the Doklam standoff is concerned.
Well, one factor is that I think Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is scheduled to visit India. So that could be one of the factors to prepare a good ground for the visit. But I think Japan itself has had so much problems with China. Why Japan? There's so many countries in South China Sea, in the littoral, who've been having problems with their island grabbing and unilateral methods. And of course, now India is having the Doklam problem. So I think, and there has been a process actually. It hasn't happened overnight. I think there's been a slow gathering of the democratic countries in Asia, including, let's say, the Malabar exercises and things like that. So as China flexes its sort of muscles and sort of spreads its wings, this is a kind of a countervailing, you could say, balancing that is taking place. And it's quite natural when one great power rises for such things to happen.
Sure.
So I think you are seeing basically that kind of countervailing and counterbalancing that is taking place.
You know, Professor Ghoshal, as far as a realignment of sorts, is that what's happening as far as Asia is concerned? All the big powers really trying to come together and trying to form an axis of sorts maybe against China, because all these nations, like the ambassador just mentioned, has a problem with China.
I think yes. Almost all the countries bordering China are having problems either in terms of their territorial disputes or in terms of maritime disputes. In the case of maritime, it is on South China Sea, and quite a few countries of the region in Southeast Asia are involved in that dispute. Even countries like Indonesia, which is not part of that dispute, they are also facing some problems with China. And recently, Indonesia's President Jokowi, he has named a certain part of Natuna Island, certain part of South China Sea as East Natuna Island. That itself shows that Indonesia is trying to send a message to China that they are not really very happy with whatever things are going on. Now, you talked about a realignment of forces. I think what is happening is that it is difficult for other external powers to really bring about any change in the balance of power within the region. And particularly after the coming of Trump, there is a certain amount of uncertainty of a country which actually had been the anchor of stability in this part of the region. Now, what is happening is that individually, many of these countries are not in a position to really countervail China's influence. So what is happening is a kind of a coalition among middle powers who are trying to build up a web of relationship among themselves to create a kind of a bulwark against future Chinese influence. You know, the kind of relationship that is happening between India, Vietnam, India, Japan, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan. So it's a kind of a wave of relationship that is developing as a kind of a middle power coalition. And that might be one of the major part of the architecture that Asia might witness in the future,
Sure.
in the coming decade.
You know, Sanjeev Srivastava, as far as what the professor just said, I mean, the common enemy, I wouldn't go as far as calling them the enemy, but the common problem factor really seems to be China, and also seems to be the glue that is bringing all these nations together. How long are they going to stick with each other?
I think the question can be also framed like this, Frank, that it's not a question of how long, how effective will be this counter?
Yeah, how effective,
how
yeah,
effective
true,
will
true,
be this counter force? Because, see, between Washington and Tokyo, personally I would, and I think others may agree, Tokyo would be a more dependable, reliable ally. Because Washington changes its colors every few seasons, really. So that that's not important. So Japan has also been on the receiving end of China's, what you can say, aggressive posturing. They have captured an island. America, by the way, did not lift a finger. They couldn't have done anything from such a distance. So Japan being on our side is a relief. But push comes to shove, every country is on its own when it really comes, if a situation like that develops. So while China can feel a little, not nervous, but at least more circumspect about the situation as it is developing, at the same time, it also may be seen by them as some kind of provocation and a cornered kind of a situation. So it's a very delicate balancing game being played out. You know, I haven't seen in the last 20, 30 years involving India such a high stakes battle of nerves being played out. So I think one should.
Who's winning this battle of nerves?
It's too early to call that, but
Sure.
whatever is happening, it's not good. You know,
Right.
it's the best way would have been China. It's people returning from China say that Chinese have never felt so aggressively common people vis-a-vis India as they are feeling now. So there is a perception there that we are trying to stonewall them. But rightfully, our perception is that, you know, like Hitler, which started with Poland and Czechoslovakia, and nobody stopped him until they attacked France. So they have already cornered Nepal. There's the string of pearls one talks about, Sri Lanka. While we Chinese neighbors may be having a problem with them, but our neighbors are cozying up with Beijing all the time. So
Right.
we have another problem on our hand. So yes, at some stage, Bhutan was our most dependable ally. We had to stand up there. I just hope Bhutan remains our most dependable ally going forward, because things are very fluid and changing fast, and it's a diplomatic game, and their money power is much more than ours.
Sure. You know, General, it's a difficult balancing act that India really has to play out at this point in time. But can we really depend on some of these external forces like the other panelists have mentioned? You know, are countries like Japan and the United States really going to be our all-weather friends? Or is it up to us to deal with the situation and just see who comes on board?
First of all, this Japanese message coming out is very significant because only yesterday I read some comments from Chinese side where they said no country is supporting India. They named particularly Japan and of course Bhutan. Both they were wrong, but that's the propaganda they've been playing. Well, how long we'll stick together, as long as China continues to project an image of being a bully in the region, which they have been. I mean, Philippines, when they came to South China Sea, despite the world decision that it is Philippines territory, they didn't listen to it. Everybody is scared of them, all these littoral countries. Japan has suffered at their hand. East China Sea, they are not even having overflight rights or the Senkaku Island. So I think all of them are looking up to India today, which can stand up to China. Bhutan, as you very rightly mentioned, is the only country totally with India as of now. Otherwise, China has ringed India from all over, both in the land as well as in the sea. So we have taken a very firm stand, and I don't think we have a choice. We must continue with that firmness, although our response has been very mature and diplomatically correct, unlike China, which is issuing threat after threat.
Frankly, they have been very petty.
As of now, I think China is only it's a psychological warfare. I don't think the war suits either China or India.
No, I don't think it's going that way at all.
Of course, everything is possible, but war is not probable.
Yes.
So this is a bullying tactic which will carry on. They have their Congress coming up in October.
Sure.
And I'm sure the president will be looking forward to continue for a second term. So he will not do anything at this stage which might make him look weak. So this face-off will continue at least till end of October. After that, apart from the Congress, the climate also is suiting India. We are well stocked there. Ours is a round-the deployment. Chinese will have, not that it is impossible, they will have more difficulty in maintaining forces there. The tail end of their supply line and the snows would come.
Sure, sure. You know, Ambassador, would you call this, what the Japanese have done over the last couple of days, a diplomatic victory for India? The diplomatic channels have been, you know, in overdrive over the last few months you've seen after the Doklam standoff. So could we call it that?
Well, I am very loath to call all these things, you know, as a diplomatic victory or defeat. I would rather say that it's a convergence of interests. And today you are seeing that, and that is why the Japanese statement has come. They are also visualizing a situation where I think the feeling at the back of the mind is that China needs to be also told that, that there are some red lines that you cannot cross. And China may be a big power, a rising power, all that. And everybody now realizes that apart from the USA, but which is far away, but has the military assets and the muscle to take on any country. I mean, the USA spends on defense, their spending on defense equals the spending of the next 20 countries.
But the messaging from the United States has been positive thus far.
But the messaging slowly has been kind of, they have progressed from, you know, we are concerned, and now they are saying, no, it has to be peacefully resolved. I think it's slowly ratcheting up a bit. But the Japanese position seems to be far clearer in that sense. I believe that this is still a lot of messaging going on here, apart from, and as the general said, that even in Doklam, I think the standoff is going to continue. He's explained why it will continue. Nobody can back off so easily. The Congress is an important factor. The next People's Congress that's coming up, Chinese Party
Right.
Congress. So that's October, I would say. It will certainly continue till the Congress, till President Xi has sewn up his second term and with all the other people that they have to put in different places. So it's part of that. Internal politics also is there. So I think I would say that the messaging is good in the sense that Japan has stood up and basically reiterated the Indian position.
Sure.
So that way I would say it's good for us.
Okay, fair enough. You know, Professor, can we see any further areas of collaboration between India and Japan? Can we see the two nations taking their relationship to the next level? We've seen in the past that both nations made an announcement of an Asia-Africa economic corridor. Many said that that was the answer really to OBOR. Can we see some more collaboration between the two countries?
I think in the case of India-Japan relationship, whereas in the last couple of years there has been quite a significant development in terms of defense cooperation, and on political issues there had been convergence of interest. But in the case of economic relationship between the two countries, still I think it's quite, low. And there's not much Japanese investment as yet within this country. And although there has been talk about joint collaboration between India and Japan in terms of building separate connectivity programs beginning from northeast of India, and also about that African corridor, economic corridor, I think not much has happened as yet in terms of the actual which can be visible. I think Japan will have to also get over some of its hesitation and in terms of its reservations about India's economic climate. I think Japan has to be a little bit more forthcoming. You know, if political understanding is there between countries, this should not be a hurdle. I can give you the example of Japan in the 70s and 80s. You know, in terms of the economic climate, Southeast Asia conditions of doing business was not that good yet. Yet Japanese invested in a huge way and tried to develop a stake in the economic development of that region. Now, in the case of India, Japan has not taken that step as yet. And I think it's time, if the Indo-Japan cooperation has to really mature into a situation whereby one can really call each other a major ally of each other that way, then I think the economic collaboration would have to be increased. Now, in terms of defense, of course, there has already been going on a lot of things.
Sure. Talking about defense collaboration, General, Shinzo Abe, I think a few months ago, said that the cap of 1% of the GDP on army spending is going to be lifted and Japanese are going to be free to spend after the sanctions that were laid after the world wars, in fact. So can we see some kind of a defense collaboration between India and the Japanese in the near future? Maybe, some exercises or something of that sort?
Certainly. Japan was under a self-imposed ban after the
Yes.
Second World War of producing any military equipment. That gradually is now changing, thanks to China maybe. Japan is one of the most advanced countries technologically. So whatever equipment we need from them, which may not be kind of weapon system, but radars, communication system, all this we can have a collaboration with Japan and it will be very good. Firstly, it will diversify our sources of import, because despite our Make in India, I think our imports will carry on next 15, 20 years. Because Make in India is a long-term process.
And we can't depend on the Israelis for everything.
Yeah, that's
They
true.
don't have everything.
So it's always good to diversify resources. I think there is a great potential for India and Japan to collaborate in the production of military equipment, which may not be lethal equipment. Japan still may not be into it, but there is plenty of scope otherwise, other than that. Of course, we have ideological similarity of the democracy in both the countries. And China being a common, even if it's not enemy, it is an adversary. China's effort to keep India down is understandable because we are the only country in this region which can stand up. So all this, Doklam Plateau is not the cause of the friction. I think it's a result of many other factors, including CPEC and our not joining the One Belt, One Road. As you mentioned about exercise, we have already done exercise with Japan. We just had exercise Malabar where
Yes.
Japan, America and India had done it. And I think more such exercises can be carried out, particularly in the seas, in the ocean, where there is a great potential of military cooperation.
Sure. Sanjeev Srivastava, let's go back to a point that someone else, one of the other panelists was making about, the rhetoric really on China's end and how the mood within China really is changing and shifting towards India. But the strategy that India has adopted thus far, do we need to change that strategy in dealing with China? Because the Chinese media has been extremely aggressive, but India has been passive and has been saying that we're going to deal with this the way it suits us best.
Yeah, I only mentioned that point, that the Chinese media and Chinese people, from what I have been hearing and actually meeting some of them in Delhi, and that they are actually feeling very anti-India at the moment, and which is no surprise. Nobody has challenged them in this manner like this for quite some time. But I think we have not been passive, we have been very mature. Our media also relatively has been mature on this. Perhaps they understand the difference between Islamabad and Beijing. Maybe that's the reason for this maturity. Whatever. But it's good. One should be mature because there is no point. China for 30 years, as they were developing their military might and muscle, they kept a very low profile. I think India should also flex its muscle in a big way when we are of the same kind of stature and the same capabilities, which we realize we are not, but we are not so far behind as to we can be pushed around. But my problem is that we should not be really seeing this situation as a very pat, normal, routine kind of a thing, that this is just messaging and posturing. Because President of China, whatever the October Communist Congress important factor, but his position is already sewn up. He is assured of a second term. Him not doing anything will project him as a weak leader. Not him not making these posturing, etc. This will project him as a weak leader. So the fear is that they may escalate, and they don't have to escalate in Doklam, where India is strategically better placed. We have a thousands of kilometers border. They can escalate it anywhere, and they need not escalate it. They can provoke Pakistan to escalate something. See, this situation needs to get resolved in a manner which is mutually beneficial. And China somehow has to understand that there is a limit beyond which India cannot be pushed. We are not bothered, frankly, about how it deals with other nations like Washington and US, etc. have never been bothered like how we have been treated by by countries like China. So we don't have to fight other people's battle. But yes, we have to protect both our dignity and turf.
Sure. You know, the situation, like Sanjeev Srivastava just put it, Ambassador, is not at all normal because this particular standoff has lasted for several weeks now. What should India's strategy be going forward? What is it that we can do to really solve the problem?
Well, I think the diplomatic channels are open. And I agree that Doklam is not the same as, say, what happened in Chumar or other places in the past where there was a difference of opinion on where the actual LAC lies. Here it's different, although it's not that this is territory that we claim, but it's a disputed area, and there are many reasons why we have taken this step, including the change of the status quo, which was agreed to and which has been discussed before. Now, what are our options? Our options are clearly the diplomatic options, number one, where although China has saying that everything will be fine if you withdraw unconditionally, in the sense that that's the primary condition, and before that happens, we will not talk. So I think India has taken the position that let us both withdraw, and that is the thing. So I think first is unconditional talks.
Sure.
I think you cannot lay down conditions that you first do this, then only I will talk. Some messaging and contacts are happening, I'm sure. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So let us see. But the timing of the solution when it comes, there are so many imponderables here about what President Xi and whether he wants to flex his muscles, etc. But let me tell you, I don't think China is going to gain out of a war here.
Right.
And neither will India, I think.
Sure.
So war is not a solution. And I think a diplomatic solution is the only solution, in my view. And if it comes to a conflict, a shooting war, then I think both sides will pay a price.
Indeed. You know, Professor, the ambassador just mentioned about the option of the diplomatic channels being left open. There are several people talking about, you know, an economic option. They're saying boycott Chinese goods. Maybe that will teach the Chinese a lesson. You know, there are reports in the media yesterday that were speaking about how the Indian government is reviewing Chinese investment in critical sectors. Is that also an option?
No, I think at this stage, imposing kind of a sanction, what you are referring to about trade and other things, would be, I think, unwise at this stage. Since we are depending on diplomatic channels and trying to resolve the issue through peaceful means, I don't think some strategy will bring about any sort of dividend to India's position right at this moment. But I think I wanted to make a comment on another important issue.
Yes.
The things that we began with, Japanese response. I think from one particular perspective, this Japanese statement, Japanese ambassador's statement about no change of status quo is very significant in the context of the entire question of China's rise as well as China's assertiveness. Because China's assertiveness is equated with changing of status quo in the structure, the balance of power in the region. The very fact the Japanese had made this statement that no country should try to unilaterally change the status quo, whether it is applicable to Doklam or it is applicable to South China Sea or East China Sea, I think it is a strong message to China that they cannot afford to do whatever they are trying to do in terms of their foreign and defense policy.
Sure.
So I think from that perspective, it is not just a support or some kind of a moral support to India's position in Doklam, but I think it's a general statement against China's assertiveness, and this also assumes a greater salience in the context that in the countries, among the countries of the region, I think the two countries, India and Japan, which can somehow match China's power in this region.
Together.
And together, and even otherwise, Japan, if it wants to become a nuclear power, it can do it very shortly
Right.
if it wants to.
Sure.
So I think from
You know,
that perspective,
Professor, I'm
I think
sorry,
this
but
this is a great development that at least Japan has come out openly in terms of a position on the question of the future regional order.
Okay.
That no change of
I'm sorry to
status quo.
cut you short, but I'm completely out of time. I've got 1 minute left on the program, so I'd like to get my other two panelists into the picture as well and get their closing comments. You know, Sanjeev Srivastava, the professor was talking about how there is a larger and a broader message in what the Japanese ambassador really has said. But, you know, we should also be prepping for a response from the Chinese.
Vis-a-vis China, Japan has issued much stronger statements because they have had much bigger trouble bilaterally with Beijing. So yes, it's an important statement. Yes, India and Japan coming together is something which should make China halt a little, just review the situation. But ultimately, like much more senior and experienced people like Ambassador and Raj Kadiyam Sahab has said, ultimately the issue is that we need to resolve.
Sure.
We need to resolve this in a manner which is not a loss of face for both the sides.
Fair enough. Can both the countries find a common ground and really come out with a solution with all that has happened on both sides of the border, General?
I think they will. I agree with Mr. Chakravarti. Ultimately, there will be a solution. And contacts, I'm sure, are continuing away from the glare of the media. Chinese, unfortunately, by their very strong rhetoric, have pushed themselves in a corner where they are finding it difficult to come out of it.
Yes.
India has been very, very cautious and reserved. I think only way is that we talk either with the situation being on the ground what it is, or both sides pull back, as India has been saying. I mean, it's difficult to imagine that you make a road into nowhere. Road is made when you have a destination. Where will this road go?
Yeah,
the
true.
only purpose is defense.
Sure.
Maybe
sure.
we pull back earlier and they pull back the next day. Maybe that's a way.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, those are the nitty-gritties
resolved.
really,
Yeah.
and those are the
I'm
minor
hopeful it will be
details.
resolved.
Yeah, we are all hopeful that the issue will be resolved without any blood being spilt. That's all the time we have on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank Raj Kadyan, Baladas Goshal, Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti and Sanjeev Srivastava for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.